We're just going to block channel 30. That's it.
Everybody ready? Okay. Want to thank all of you for being here. I'm here with council members Miguel Arias, council member Nelson Esparza, also our city attorney Andrew Jans. I want to address obviously the Reedley lab, what the city of Fresno is doing, and an ordinance that my colleagues and I are bringing before the city council on Thursday. Some background. On July 25th, the Mid-Valley Times broke the shocking story that an illegal biolab had been operating in Reedley since December 22, where, according to the lab representative, quote, mice were genetically engineered to catch and carry the COVID-19 virus, end quote. Now, after further inspections, investigators found blood, tissue, bodily fluid samples, and thousands of vials that were not labeled. They also found 900 mice and nearly 200 that were dead. On May 4th, the CDC inspected the lab and found infectious agents that were both bacterial and viral in nature. Some of these included hepatitis B and C, rubella, malaria, E. coli, pneumonia, and chlamydia. It became apparent that the lab had illegally disposed of medical waste that possibly ended up in the landfill. It was believed that the people operating the lab were Chinese nationals, and it was reported that they were refusing to cooperate with investigators. Now, after the report in the Mid-Valley Times on July 25th, I received numerous calls from concerned constituents asking me questions about the lab and hoping to get information that they had every right to know. It's important to remember what our community, nation, and world have gone through from the nearly 3-year COVID-19 pandemic, which many believe resulted from a lab leak out of the Wuhan lab in China. Now, worldwide, there were 7 million deaths. In the United States, there were 1.2 million, and in California, 103,000 deaths. The COVID-19 virus was responsible for the destruction of lives and livelihoods, the economy, businesses. Children were foolishly locked out of school for 2 years and were destroyed academically, socially, and emotionally. People lost their freedoms. They were forced to get experimental vaccines, and they were repeatedly lied to by the CDC and government officials. Now we get the same lack of transparency from the Board of Supervisors and them pointing fingers at everyone but themselves. Now, our citizens had and have every right to know about this lab and what was going on out there. And so I held a press conference on July 31st raising questions that my constituents were asking. Now, some of them were, is the lab sponsored by the Chinese government? What was the purpose and goals of their experimenting with COVID-19 and having mice catch and carry the disease? What were they doing with all the bacterial and viral infections found at the illegal lab? Are the people that were running and operating the lab Chinese nationals or American citizens? If they weren't American citizens, did they come here illegally? Are there any current potential dangers to the public as a result of the experiments and the illegal dumping of medical waste that involve COVID-19 and other potential infectious agents? And with Lemoore Naval Air Station only 40 miles away from this illegal lab, was the location of this illegal lab a coincidence? Or was it purposeful? Most importantly, why wasn't the public informed of this illegal lab? The Fresno County Department of Public Health, has an obligation to notify the public of potential dangers, both past and present. Why were the Board of Supervisors also silent and hiding this information from the public? This is similar to the crisis with foster children sleeping on the floor. They only addressed it when it was exposed to the public through the Fresno Bee. This is frankly disgraceful and represents a willful decision to hide from and shirk their responsibilities as elected representatives of the public. Now, since my press conference on July 31st, Fresno County has released more information, but this information has only raised more questions. They report they had a press release ready to go out to the public in March or April if the public found out about the lab. But of course they didn't, so no information was put out to the public. Now one supervisor states he was informed about the lab on March 22nd, while two other supervisors state they were only informed on July 27th, with one of them being the chairman of the board. How is it that the chairman of the board would not be informed about the lab, but others would? Two other supervisors, Mendez and Brandow, refused to tell the public when they were informed or what they were told. Supervisor Brandow has remained silent about his knowledge of the lab, except to attack those constituents who are angry at not being informed and calling them, quote, sycophants for supporting my efforts to get him and his colleagues on the board to be more honest and transparent with the public. Supervisor Mendez called me Joe McCarthy for calling out the Board of Supervisors, hiding this from the public, which is typical of his ignorant comments and need for a history lesson. Supervisor Magzik now states that Governor Newsom's Department of Public Health pressured the county to not release information which the Public Health Department from California has stated is, quote, patently false, end quote. Someone's not telling the truth. Now, no matter how much the Board of Supervisors attempt to blame others for their failures or to attempt to deflect from their incompetence, the public should have been informed about this dangerous illegal lab in their backyard. The fact is, if not for the July 25th Mid-Valley Times story, 8 months after the illegal lab's discovery, when and if ever would the County Department of Public Health and the Board of Supervisors have notified the public? Would they have ever done so? It's clear, with China stealing intellectual properties, buying land near military sites, having a spy balloon traverse our entire country taking pictures of military installations as it went from one coast to the other, and now discovering this illegal biological lab doing experiments with COVID-19 and dangerous infectious agents in Fresno County, we at every level of government must be more hypervigilant and enact better safeguards to ensure the safety of the public. That is why this week, I, along with my two colleagues, council members Miguel Arias and Nelson Esparza, in consultation with the City Attorney's Office, have brought forward a new city ordinance, the Infectious Disease Lab Accountability and Transparency Ordinance, to address this critical issue in the city of Fresno. This ordinance will ensure greater accountability and protection for the public. At my July 31st press conference, I called on the Board of Supervisors to enact similar legislation to protect the public and to ensure the public is aware of such a lab in the future. It's been 3 weeks, and as is typical, nothing from the Board of Supervisors has been done. Speaker McCarthy, recognizing the seriousness of this dangerous lab, has already said there will be congressional investigation into this lab, and I'm sure greater oversight will be pursued. The same should happen on the state level. Lastly, what we can never tolerate is information being hidden from the public. There being lack of accountability and transparency, calling constituents who want information, quote, sycophants, and avoiding responsibility, which is what we've seen from the Board of Supervisors. That is completely unacceptable. The public pays the bills, every elected official works for them, and the public has a right to always know what happened and what affects them and their families. That is why we've brought forward this important ordinance before the City Council, and we hope it's passed unanimously on Thursday. Councilmember Arias. Oh, sorry.
So good morning. I want to start off by echoing the sentiments of my colleagues. As the city's elected representatives, we have the opportunity on a daily basis to grapple with and solve a myriad of issues. We're well versed in the most pressing municipal issues of our time, but every now and again, there's something novel that presents itself. And COVID-19, in the most literal sense, what was just that. But fast forward to today, post-pandemic, and there are still surprises. An issue of health, safety, and transparency that we are meeting head on with legislation this coming Thursday. It is our responsibility to react to situations like the discovery of this lab in our home county accordingly. We are ultimately responsible for the safe operations of businesses and developments within the city's limits. I want to make clear that our intent with this proposed ordinance is to achieve 3 goals. And again, that's safety, health, transparency with all of our residents when concerning infectious disease labs. The passage of this ordinance will not be an unfamiliar role for our city. In 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, this city council acted swiftly and responsibly for our city's residents by securing resources needed to set up necessary systems to maximize the health and wellness of our city. The council established testing sites so residents could receive results in a timely manner, partnered with organizations that engage in contact tracing to help prevent the further spread of the virus, and distributed resources like masks, at-home test kits, and food supplies for our most vulnerable residents. Our city, at that time, acted as a de facto public health department, something we are again being charged with having to do in the wake of this alarming discovery. The ordinance we're taking to council on Thursday, the Infectious Disease Lab Accountability and Transparency Ordinance, is designed to fill that gap and ensure that there is a system of accountability that prevents a situation like that from ever occurring within the city limits. It should also be clear that as the legislative body of the city that governs land use, we are doing our job and bringing this ordinance forward. Every time we gather for city council meetings, we are routinely making decisions on the what, the where, and the how of intended land uses and operations within the city of Fresno. Whether that be selling products like alcohol or cannabis, handling hazardous waste materials, or building a new commercial or residential development, the city of Fresno has a mandatory interest and responsibility for the placement of how our city is planned and the quality of life that our residents enjoy. That is now going to include the hazardous risk of locating an infectious disease laboratory within our city limits. And we'll hear a little bit more on what some of the details are, but we are effectively going to mandate that any infectious disease lab that wants to operate in the city of Fresno notify our planning department, go through a process, and ensure that on our end, as a city, that we notify residents within, I believe, a 1,000-foot radius of where the proposed location will be. And so I want to communicate to every resident that has reached out to the city with concern regarding the newly discovered lab that the Fresno City Council hears you, and we are actively working to make our city safer and ensure the highest level of health and safety for all of our residents. With that, I'll bring up my colleague, Councilmember Arias.
Thank you. Let me start by stating the obvious. We just went through a historic pandemic, and us three had a different perspective on how the city and local government should respond to the pandemic. But the one thing that we've always been consistent as a council, irrespective of our political and ideological views, is that we will keep the public informed, that we will be transparent with the information, and we will let the public clearly understand how we spend every resource in responding to the pandemic. And transparency is a very key aspect of how we run local government. Without it, we do not have the trust of our residents. Without the trust of our residents, we can't effectively do our jobs. The city of Fresno will not allow the county board of supervisors respond to this lab to be the standard for how we manage these types of labs within the city, jurisdiction. We will not allow the standard of keeping it secret from the public, the disinformation that they've engaged in, the finger pointing, and the lack of willingness to understand that the public had a right to know what was taking place in their neighborhood. If the residents have a right to know when a restaurant's going to sell alcohol in their neighborhood, they surely have a right to know when a foreign lab engaged in experiments related to COVID is operating within their neighborhood and within their city. This ordinance very clearly requires the planning director to inform the council member of the area at the point of receiving an application, not after the fact, not after the inspections find something done incorrectly. It also requires that prior to the planning director approving a permit for such a lab to operate, we must notify the public and the neighbors within 1,000 feet, not after the fact, not after the cat's out of the bag. The whole point of this ordinance is to make up for the failure of the Board of Supervisors and the County of Fresno's response to informing the public, informing the local jurisdiction about the awarding of a toxic materials permit, and a failure to provide oversight to how that toxic materials permit was being managed and operated, and by whom. The City of Fresno residents should be assured that the City Council will not allow the County Board of Supervisors' failure to repeat itself within our own jurisdiction. And I implore other city managers and other mayors within the county to look at similar ordinances to ensure that their city and their residents are communicated prior to these kind of operations popping up within their jurisdictions. And again, we're not choosing to be here to score a political point. we are being inundated by residents who are asking us, why didn't you guys tell us about the Chinese lab operating within our city? And our only response is, the county doesn't have an obligation to inform us of a toxic materials permit being awarded. We were depending and relying on the county board of supervisors and the public health department to do its job, and not just awarding these permits, but providing oversight. They clearly failed in this aspect. And what's troubling for me is we all in these roles have significant responsibilities, and things always fall to the cracks. Sometimes a builder will start demolishing a historic building without telling us. Our job is to respond and be very public about it. Sometimes we get jacked for $600,000. Our job is to tell the public and respond and provide policies and procedures to avoid that from reoccurring. Sometimes, an active shooting situation occurs. Our job is to put out the video evidence and be transparent with the public. It's not so much the incident, it's the response. And the response from this board of supervisors has been to clearly state they followed their book and they're not changing their book. And they refuse to incorporate public noticing, transparency, and oversight to toxic materials permits that are required to operate these kind of labs. From the city of Fresno's perspective, we're drawing the line here. No more will we allow the county or simply rely on the county to do their jobs of oversight when it comes to toxic materials. We are going to be receiving a list of all the toxic materials permits that they've awarded within the city of Fresno. That will be handed over to our code enforcement department to engage in proactive inspections to ensure that those permits are being utilized in the method in which they were received. This ordinance further includes accountability for the property owner as well as the business operating within these facilities. Property owners, whether you live in LA, in Carmel, in San Francisco, or out of state, cannot simply look away and say, I didn't know what was taking place in my building. They too will be held accountable for fines if these permits for toxic materials are not being utilized as for the purpose that they were awarded in the case of this Chinese COVID lab was undertaking. With that, I'll simply end it with this. Our ultimate responsibility is to the public and to residents. And it starts with being transparent and honest about some failures and some mistakes. They're not comfortable. Frankly, they're uncomfortable. But what's worse is when we're knocking on doors and talking to residents at grocery stores, and they're asking us, why didn't you tell us about it? Sure, you could have said, we don't have all the information yet, but we're working on it. But simply not tying people for a year is unacceptable, and that's what we're hoping to change in the city of Fresno. Thank you.
Questions, please, for any of us?
So are you saying when the lab was operating in Fresno, the county didn't give you guys a heads up of the type of activities that were going on?
Correct.
Do you want to answer that, Miguel?
Yes, right now the lab that was operating in Fresno in the original location, they had received a toxic materials permit awarded by the County of Fresno's Public Health Department. The County Health Department is not required to notify the City of Fresno of such an award being given to a facility within our jurisdiction. This would require, we have a request to the county asking for a list of all the permits that they've awarded within the City of Fresno, so the code enforcement can go out there and check for themselves on making sure that they're following the rules that the permit was awarded for. So there is no public noticing of toxic materials permits currently in the county code. And it's clear to me that they're not attempting to change that. They have no intention of changing that. The county, when they approve a convenience store or a gas station with an alcohol permit, they inform the public. When they approve a restaurant or when they identify a restaurant that has a pest infestation, they notify the public, right? We all get the stories of who got shut down for not having hot water. They notify the public when a coffee shop on Fulton Street doesn't have hot water and they got closed down. But they don't notify the public when an infectious disease lab is operating and it's being shut down. That they don't seem to have the time or the urgency to notify the public for.
And then so you guys are going to get this list from the county and then the code enforcement. So this
Yes.
will probably be a tall task.
Yes, and it might be a tall task. It might be a couple dozen permits. It might be a couple hundred permits. We're waiting that information from the county, and we'll assess what we have to do after that. It might be a lab within CVS. It might be a standalone warehouse somewhere in industrial zoning. We don't know what we don't know, but here's what we do know. We can't simply trust the county to do the business as usual when it comes to these toxic materials permits and these labs. So we're now choosing to obtain the information and evaluate it for ourselves.
How will people be notified if they live in their lab?
Part of the ordinance is that they would the same process that we notify people for development permits, for alcohol and restaurant permits. The planning department would be required to notify all addresses, all residents and property owners within 1,000 feet prior to them awarding any development permit. So before the business can open, they shall notify the neighbors within 1,000 feet at least 30 days in advance. And that's snail mail. That gets also sent to the council member in advance. The council member will receive it at the point of the application being submitted to the planning director. And then the safeguard is that if that council member chooses not to disclose it to the public, then the public will be notified 30 days prior to that permit being approved for operations.
Do they protest at all in opening or have any kind of input?
That is, they will go through the same process for conditional use permit. They have a right to protest. They have a right to, appeal the permit being awarded, and that's where the public comes in. And our public is very active. They tend to protest every single development, whether it's housing or commercial, retail. So we anticipate more public engagement as a result of this ordinance change.
One other thing I just want to add also, when there is a lab that comes to Fresno and they have an intent to operate a lab, they're to notify the planning department. The planning department in the ordinance is to notify the council of the intent. So it isn't just the council member, it's the entire city council. When it's the entire city council, it's the entire city of Fresno because we represent everyone in the entire city of Fresno.
You guys talked a lot about the transparency of the Fresno County Board of Supervisors. They did come out and say the reasons why they couldn't work with state and federal agencies. My question is, have you guys had to work on that same level? And what's your response to them saying exactly the reasons why they couldn't speak to the public?
Okay, well, first of all, the stories have changed. Supervisor Magzig initially said that the FBI did not inform him that he couldn't tell the public. Then he's changed that. Then I had a debate with him on KMJ. He did not tell anyone during that debate that the California Department of Public Health told the county not to reveal anything. He said that the following Tuesday when they had a board meeting. So he has been withholding information. So he didn't tell anybody about anything with the California Department of Public Health. During that Tuesday meeting, we find out some of the Board of Supervisors were informed March 22nd. Others refused to say what they were told and when. July 27th, apparently Pacheco says he was informed, and the chairman was informed July 27th. Does that sound like accountability? Does that sound like transparency to you? It doesn't to me. Why would they hold a press release in March or April in case the public found out or you folks found out, but they withheld it the whole time, never revealing it? If not for the Mid-Valley Times July 25th story, the question has to be, it was 8 months when that was revealed. Would they have ever told the public? And if so, when? The Department of Public Health, county, has an obligation to inform the public. They're the public health department. The Board of Supervisors has an obligation, one, to know what the heck is going on, and two, when they know what's going on, to inform the public. They withheld information, they hid information, and it's only because, frankly, on July 31st, when we did a press conference and asked these questions for our constituents, that they finally decided to reveal some of the information that they had, and some of it is inconsistent with the California Department of Public Health. There is no transparency over there. It is like the Keystone Cops running the Board of Supervisors over there, and it's a disgrace. Councilman.
If I would answer your direct question with some detail, give you 3 examples. A couple years ago, we found out that there was a Proud Boy working in the police department. He has a right to due process, but the city was very public about it, and his employment was terminated immediately. Then after that, we had the city had been victimized by an online scammer for $600,000. Once the council found out, we informed the public, and that was that there was a federal agency, the FBI, doing an investigation for more than a year. But as public servants, we have a responsibility of a fiduciary duty that we take an oath to serve the public and inform the public. And lastly, I will tell you, a couple weeks ago, the staff wanted to study a bio-waste facility in West Fresno. The staff would prefer not to tell the public or have a community meeting till after the completion of the study. I insisted that the public and the community should know about it prior to us even launching the study for a bio-waste facility. Tonight, we're having that community meeting prior to the council considering this $500,000 consulting contract to build that facility years downstream. We are constantly tested on whether we value public transparency and public noticing. Our city has publicly noticed every cannabis shop, every alcohol license, every time something's going to somebody's neighborhood, and then we respond and affirm the concerns that the neighbors have. In this case, the county had 3 opportunities to inform the public: Fresno, Reedley, and the new facility. In each of those times, they failed to notify the public and the neighborhood and that community that there was a lab operating or planning to operate within their community. I think that's complete failure of leadership and a fiduciary responsibility to the public's interest. All right, thank you all.
Can you just there's a lab right down the street here in Fresno. You guys have no control over it now, and does your ordinance change that?
The ordinance would require any new labs specific to infectious diseases to have to register and notify and apply with the applying department. I don't know what type of lab that is. I'm sure that lab has a toxic materials permit from the county public health department. So once we get that list, we'll do an inspection evaluation to see what's actually taking place within that facility.
But existing labs don't have to go through this?
They don't. There is no process. That has all been the full responsibility of the county health department, public health department. It's what they do, right? During the pandemic, the board of supervisors very directly told us, stay in your lane. You don't operate and oversee the public health department. We do. In this case, we have been for years. Every city has in the county, trusting that the public health department would do the right thing, and they failed to do so. So now it's incumbent on the city of Fresno, with the resources we have, to step into that process. So I'll give you an example. Great question. If we have, say, 50 toxic materials permits awarded within the city of Fresno, and we find out that half a dozen are not operating as their award was applied for, we would then notify the state and federal agencies of that and engage in the enforcement of that permit or the revocation of that permit. Now that permit is completely in the jurisdiction of the county of Fresno. So we would have to figure out what the county intends to do once we identify these challenges. It's no different right now. When you open a restaurant, a nightclub, and you get an alcohol license to sell, if you don't follow rules, the local rules, court enforcement, the police department will give you citations. That eventually makes it to California ABC, and California ABC revokes your permit for not following local rules. So we anticipate the same process. If we identify a violation of local rules, a violation of the toxic materials permit, we notify the authorizing agency, in this case a county, and also the state and feds, and then they would have to engage in the revocation procedures.
Any other questions?
Thank you.